Welcome to all. I'm Nandita and I'm joined here with my colleagues at the Foundation for Democratic Reforms. So, as we know, 2023 has come to an end and it has been a very eventful year with many moments scattered across the months. So, we thought that it would be interesting to examine some of those events and analyze its impact on India as well as the world. So, to discuss this with us, here we have Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan. He is a former civil servant and the founder of the Lok Satta movement, and he's the founder of our organization as well. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Nandita, and welcome to all of you.
Okay. So, to start off, I thought it would be interesting to analyze the world situation as a whole. So, there have been some recent election results in the Latin America as well as the Europe, which have suggested the rise of the right wing. And we have seen a similar situation in India as well with the recent elections. So, what can you say about the seeming link between this phenomenon as well as the rising sentiments such as hyper-nationalism, isolationism, as well as increasing support for movements such as anti-immigration? And what can you say about the link with that and with the Indian political scenario as well?
You put together three different strands, as I said. One is the economic strand. Take, for instance, the recent election result in Argentina. It's largely because of the frustration on account of economic mismanagement of the country, 140% inflation and so on and so forth. And of course, division between two relatively conservative politicians with a somewhat similar vision. And therefore, one of them elbowed out even in the earlier stage. So that's one strand. The second strand is the cultural and demographic strand, a sense of insecurity on account of demographic changes. Certain groups, the population is stagnating or even diminishing. Some other groups' population increasing on account of either birth rates or immigration. And therefore, all kinds of fears. And third is immigration itself provokes many fears and uncertainties and insecurities, both economic and cultural. I think we must deconstruct them. While the net impact may be an integrated one together, but to understand, we must deconstruct. If you take the economic part of it, it's more or less a cyclical phenomenon. There was a time immediately after the Second World War when much of the world was enamored by the Soviet experiment, the seeming success of large infrastructure, large industry, and who doesn't want equality of outcomes? I mean, this human nature, right? We all want to enjoy the fruits of all human development. It's a very natural expectation. But the 70s onwards, or perhaps 80s onwards, the world realized that unless there is individual incentive for prosperity, for economic growth, for wealth creation, and a framework to ensure that everybody has an opportunity irrespective of the circumstances of birth. So there is a merger of two principles: wealth creation based on economic freedom, liberty, competition, and choice, and opportunity irrespective of birth, which provides a framework for everybody to grow through the state action. Europe has been in the forefront of that, and much of the developed world and civilized world embraced that. Unfortunately, in the last 20, 30 years, some of these settled issues have been reopened because of sub-regional and regional inequalities in the globe. If you take trade, China has become such a behemoth. Many other countries are now terrified. America and other countries which actually propagated free trade now are worried about it because they lost manufacturing jobs. They exported jobs, in effect. Consumers are happy, but the producers are unhappy. And ultimately, you can't have producers unhappy and consumers happy for long. There has to be some kind of a resolution of that. So many things that appear to be fairly well settled, this beautiful combination of economic growth to entrepreneurship and economic freedom, and reasonable welfare measures to give everybody an opportunity, that has now broken down. I think this is the convulsion that we see. And that is combined with added insecurities on account of breathtakingly rapid technological advances. Take the whole computer era. What's happened In the manufacturing era, people with reasonable level of skills, but not very high level of skills, some school education, got a pretty decent job. They were always confident that their lives are better than their predecessors, their parents. For the first time in the West, the younger people are no longer confident that their lives are going to be better than their parents. And this is completely against modernity. The last 400-500 years, there's one axiomatic thing that the children's lives will be better than their parents' lives. Take India, for instance. Each of us, whatever be the generation, we can genuinely claim that our lives are better than our parents' lives because we're in the growth phase. In the West, it's no longer true. And increasingly, wealth is concentrated because of the aggregator effect of the technology. Wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few people who have the capital and who can marshal the intellectual capital, the big companies, and the professionals who have high level of skills and therefore can partake in modern economic activity. The rest of them are increasingly marginalized. The pandemic actually accelerated this process, and thereby the semi-skilled, unskilled people, they're much worse off, whereas the skilled people and professionals and companies are much better off. You have never seen such divergence. So there are tremendous consequences on account of this economic trajectory in politics and society. And I think that conversion is what we are seeing right now. And the other two factors, as I mentioned, whether it is immigration or the cultural factors. My belief is Karl Marx may have been wrong on many things, but his fundamental precept that economics dictates politics and society, and in a large measure, history, I think he was broadly on target. So these are byproducts of economic insecurities. After all, earlier, 30, 40 years ago, the American whites were never afraid of the future, the demographic changes. But now the economic insecurities deepen this, and some people always use that as an opportunity to propagate certain ideologies. Similarly, immigration is again a function of economics. Why will people immigrate? And if you immigrate, why do people resist? There was a time when America welcomed immigration. They wanted immigrants. Today, they don't want. Because if economically the dominant sections don't feel secure enough, then immigration becomes a major problem. So I think a lot of it is related to a certain breakdown of the consensus in the world about economic management in the nation states and perhaps even in terms of global trade. Hopefully, in the next 10, 15 years, there'll be some kind of a stability. But right now, we're at the peak of instability because artificial intelligence, if anything, is further deepening this divide and making it more complex. Each of us is insecure. Take Indian IT workers in the last 10, 15 years or 20 years. The biggest employer for Indian middle classes was the information technology. Now, many people are worried, I don't know to what extent those fears are justified, that artificial intelligence, etc., they may decimate millions of jobs. So I think this convulsion will probably continue for some more years until some kind of a stability in terms of technology, economic management, they happen. There is some evidence to show that technology is actually improving lives and prosperity across the world. If the nation states act with reasonable degree of diligence and with some foresight and some restraint, then I think countries are going to prosper, at least the poorer and middle income countries. And to that extent, I think there will be greater social stability and political stability.
Okay, so from this we can kind of understand that from the fears of economic instability, it has clearly affected people's sentiments, and that has led to a lot of political impact as well. So that kind of attributes a lot of importance to the impact of the people and what they think, and basically about their opinions. In the age of social media, like, a lot of importance has been given to that. But despite that, so in 2023, we have also seen the inflamed state of the Israel-Palestine conflict coming to another thing. And despite this importance given to people's opinions, that there has been a lot of rising sentiment for maybe, like, a ceasefire of sorts, because we have also seen the devastation of a lot of Palestinian citizens in a massacre of sorts. But despite this rising sentiment, nothing has been done to stop it, despite claims of a multipolar world. So, what can you say about the instability of the
I think they
international
cannot
order?
be explained on economic logic alone. You take Palestinian problem, it's the legacy of history.
Yeah,
Many of us
definitely.
understand the unique set of circumstances. And perhaps in the last 20 years or so, Mr. Netanyahu was allowed to get away with the notion that there's no need to have a two-state solution to Palestinian problem. While in the short term that served his interests, in the long term that was always a powder keg. On top of it, unfortunately, the moderate, sensible, visionary leadership of Palestine gave way to the reckless, bigoted, extremely dangerous marauders in the form of Hamas, etc. So this combination is now playing havoc there. It's nothing to do with global economy or global forces. Whereas Russia, the loss of an empire and a relative economic decline. Russia is now a middle level power. If you take away the massive arsenal of ICBMs, what does Russia have? Its economy is about 2.5 trillion. It's almost half of India's or 60% of India's and will be much smaller as a percentage in the coming years compared to us. Militarily, outside of these strategic weapons, they are just a middling power. And economically, they're inconsequential and they lost the sense of that superpower now, their empire, which they had it well before the communist revolution, right from Tsarist times. So it's more that. And another thing which might develop is again China, unresolved problems, the territory of Taiwan, etc. So I think these are unrelated to economic management and normal other social or political developments. And hopefully, in the next 20, 25 years, such problems will be resolved much more sensibly. But the world is now paying a price. And particularly the communities that are suffering, whether the Israeli people who are butchered by the Hamas terrorists, or the innocent Palestinians who are now the collateral damage because of Israeli bombing, or the Ukrainian people who are fighting very bravely and heroically, but paying an extraordinary price to preserve freedom and their own national identity. I think all these are paying the enormous price. Let's hope global community will figure out a set of solutions over a period of time. The only solace we have as humankind is, while all these are horrific, if we take the long trajectory of history, generationally speaking, the world is much more peaceful, much less violent, much less brutal than it was. It's not enough of a consolation, but we must derive hope from the fact that the world is actually getting better despite all these horrific instances.
Okay, just one more follow-up question to that. So, can we attribute that to then the rise of just the fact that a lot of the conflicts that had been put to rest temporarily are again rising? Can we attribute that to the rise of identity politics
I
then?
don't know if there are many such conflicts that are now rising afresh.
But so Israel Palestine is one definitely, and then the Russia Ukraine, and as you mentioned, China with Taiwan, and also the conflict going on in the Republic of Congo. So all of that combined.
Agreed. But if you take Africa as a whole, 20, 25 years ago, Africa did not seem peaceful like this. Today, Africa is an emerging continent.
Definitely.
Not only growing demographically, but economically, it's very vibrant. 6 to 7% growth in Africa, many countries, is no longer the exception. It's pretty much the norm. It's only get better. Yes, Congo is still a problem. So, in that sense, I think actually the world is getting better. Conflict is getting much less. As I said, it's hardly any solace to the people who are paying the humongous price in terms of their blood and sweat and tears. But if you take the global picture, things are not as dismal as they appear to be. But we have a lot more to do to ensure decent living and peace and harmony in pockets of the world. So I am optimistic in the broader term, in the longer term.
Thank you.